Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a more fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.
Welcome back, everybody, to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, and I am here with Augusto Pinaud. How's it going, Augusto?
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing really well, and we are joined again with our regular contributor, Francis Wade. How are you doing, Francis?
I'm fine. It's great to be with you guys again.
I am sitting in my office and looking at the beautiful sunny sky and looking forward to this conversation. We are going to be talking about choosing a tablet computer or a mobile tablet, as some people call it. And I think this is a really important topic for a lot of people because of the fact that we use screens of different sizes today, and as we traverse between screens, it's really important that the tool we use, the tool we choose to use, is effective for us. And that comes with a lot of different options and a lot of choices. And I think it's really good that we make that choice, that first choice, right out the gate. I want to talk about operating system and form factor and budget and app parity across ecosystems. We're each going to probably have a different opinion on choosing some of these pieces, and I think that'll be really healthy for us. So let's get started with choosing an operating system. I believe in an operating system choice as being sort of twofold, right? You have the selection of the operating system because it matches your smartphone, right? It's already your smartphone operating system. Why shouldn't it be your tablet operating system? And then the other side is that you're not particularly wedded to your smartphone, or you don't own a smartphone, and so therefore you should compare it against the three major tablet operating systems and make a choice based on that comparison that you meet.
For me, it started as a matter of something I picked. I picked my tablet, or my original tablet, when the first iPad came out, where tablets still was not something that was mainstream. I understood the power that tablet may have on my workflow, or what I was hoping it was going to have on my workflow. And after I moved there and been so many years in the iOS ecosystem, there are certain apps that are still only available on the iPad that I use that make me hard and make a challenge for me to leave the iOS, mostly because then I need to find a replacement, and I like them and enjoy them and use them almost every day, if not every day, multiple times. So I'm in a certain way stuck in iOS. There is a couple of outside projects I'm doing right now where the people is forcing me to go to Google Docs. And it's been a struggle because Google Docs on the iPad, it works 80%. So you can write and all that, but you cannot see, for example, as of today, the changes that others do or have done to that document. But then for a core writing space, that is what we're doing on that case or in that project, it's a problem because I cannot go simply and dump text in there. I need to know what happened and what not. So that has forced me to consider the possibility of adding another piece of gear to my arsenal that I'm trying to avoid, mostly because I already carry more gear than what I should. And when you look into that, you discover that the gear I need, it's basically forcing or going to lock me into a Chromebook or a Chrome tablet because of that. That said, my criteria for laptops or for tablets used to be the same one as laptops. The larger the battery, the better. That is one of the reasons I have used also the iPad for so long, because it used to last me a whole work day. Now the processor has improved or speed has improved and I use it more. It lasts me the whole work day, but then I have no use for night. So I eventually end up charging my iPad around the middle of the day, so that way I have use for the night. But I believe that the larger the capacity working wise for the battery, that is, in my opinion, the most important feature that a tablet and a laptop can have.
Well, for me, if you remember the last time we talked about this, I spoke about the way that I use my ecosystem. I use my laptop for creation, my tablet for consumption, and my phone for mobility. Now, I can't say that I started out thinking that I should do it this way. It's more of an evolution. And to be honest, I only got a tablet because I wanted to watch movies on a veranda. That's what motivated me. I said, you know what? It's too difficult to drag the laptop all the way over there. Phone screen is too small. I finally said, okay, let me get a tablet and see what I can do with it. And it was because I wanted to use it for consumption. And that practice has sort of grown. So I would read email in addition to watching movies. I would send the occasional email. Usually I'm just dispensing email, getting rid of it, or deleting it and then reading it quickly and scanning it. I don't use the productivity apps on my tablet because they are underpowered. And I like to jump between having multiple, I like to put in pictures. I like to do research at the same time on a second screen. So when I'm at my laptop, I'm using a second screen. Usually has a browser up so that I can jump back and forth between finding bits of content and creating content. So it doesn't help me to create. It's really just for leaning back and listening. So whether it's an iOS or Windows or Android, doesn't matter as much to me. Matter of fact, what I'm using is the Amazon Fire, which is sort of underpowered Android, according to the purists. But it serves my needs perfectly because I don't travel with it very often. It goes with me, but it's really a backup. It really is just a consumption device that fits a particular niche for me. So I think for me, it's you might call it the minimum viable product because I'm using the least amount of tablet power possible to meet my needs. So I figured out my needs are very limited in that area, and I'm using a very inexpensive tablet just to fill the gap, and it seems to be filling it perfectly so far.
So it seems to me like the choice for Augusto, yours was battery power. Obviously, since you were already using the Apple ecosystem, it made a lot of sense for you to go with iPad. For you, Francis, it seems as though, it's only several functions that you use on the tablet, and therefore having something like the Amazon Fire makes a lot of sense for you. And in my situation, I chose and have been on the Google flagship Nexus tablets for quite some time, and only recently stepped away from that to go to the Samsung Galaxy Tab world. I think that, for me, again, I have a lot more technology gear than I probably should. And I think, and it's a product of the industry, right? Being a technology consultant, I'm doing a lot of work that requires me to test software across many different platforms, and therefore I have the devices to be able to do that. But my go-to right now, as we talked about several episodes ago, is my Samsung Galaxy Tab, and it's an 8-inch screen. And I chose that because I chose Android because of my use of G Suite in my business. So I use the Google Apps ecosystem in my business, and I use Google across pretty much everything in my personal life, and I needed access to the most seamless experience with regard to Google, and that meant Android. It just sort of went from there. So the Google Nexus platforms had pure Android on them, and I really enjoyed that. Let's talk about application parity and the need to look at whether or not the tablet of choice, in this case the operating system of choice for your tablet, has the applications that you need. Now, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, this was a much bigger deal than it is today, and you guys can agree or disagree with me here, but I feel like today most of what you need is available on all of the devices, except for very few things. Like if you really need iCloud, what's within the iWorks interface, like Apple Pages, numbers, and so forth, you really will only be able to get that on a mobile tablet, on an iPad, or messages, or those kinds of things that are Apple-specific products. But otherwise, you pretty much can do most of what you need to do on a mobile tablet across any of the ecosystems, right? Windows, Android, or iOS.
I agree. And then before I go into this thing that I agree, I may say you may not to write down that paragraph where you justify how to carry that bunch of technology with you, because some of us may need it to say something better than what we say. What you said sounds much better than what I did.
Yeah.
I happened to be in a meeting last week, and the meeting started with my iPad. And then we need a little bit of screen, so I opened my bag and pulled a second iPad. And then we needed another screen, and I pulled another device. And when we end up the meeting, we have, out of my bag, 5 devices showing different things on this meeting on that table. So I may need that excuse that you have there to work.
I always call myself the MacGyver of productivity, because I go to meetings and I have the dongle for this this adapter. I have the Ethernet to USB adapter in the other pocket of my bag. I have the different HDMI cables for this and that, and it's just a factor of just coming to meetings and recognizing that you're going to interface with different systems and legacy hardware in some of the client sites that I go to, and so you just want to make sure that you're prepared for things, and so you learn to cobble together what you need in order to make the technology work. You choose to carry more, I think, full-size hardware pieces. I carry a lot of connectors and adapters and all kinds of other fun stuff with me.
Oh, I carry those too, and then I wonder why my bag is so heavy. But that said, I think, as you said, when I started into the tablet world, it was really, you were stuck with one or the other. Even at that time, Google Docs wasn't powerful at all. So it wasn't really an option as it is today. And Microsoft simply decided for the longest time that they were not going to play on that space unless you buy their devices that were their devices. So I'm going to self-censor into my opinion of those devices. You were basically stuck. If you wanted to go to a tablet at the early days, as you said, your options was you go for a quick office or one of those options or documents to go. That is even what I had even before the tablet, when I had my Palm Pilot. Documents to go was a solution because you could work on Word documents and then email them, and nobody knew that you were working on a tablet, or in that case, a PDA. And that has evolved. There is still some quirks between Google Docs and Word and the other way around, and even with Pages. But for most cases, regardless which of the 3 you use, you will be able to work without anybody knowing that you are working on a tablet or that you are not working and that you're working remotely. The reality is the technology where it is right now, it will make almost no difference if you pick an Android or you pick an iOS as your platform. There is specific applications. I use an application for journaling that I use multiple times a day, and I love it. That is called One Day or Day One. That is only iOS, and I like it, and I like it a lot, and it's not available there. The other thing is I use OmniFocus, that is also Mac only or an iOS only product. So if I would like to move, I will need to start for looking, okay, I need to change this. For what I'm going to change it. And that's what keeps me, make myself less portable. That said, I carry an Android device with me, and there are applications, my calendars, work calendar, live in Google, so no problem, but my personal and family calendars live in iOS on iCloud. There is now software that will connect to the iCloud and then put it on your calendar application on Android, because it's what I have on the Pocket. That's a work phone, so I carry it for work things. And at the beginning, a couple of times before I looked to solve the problem, that's what happened to me. I opened the work calendar, and because I was not looking, giving a real view of what I was on my world, I said, oh, yeah, we can do it that time. And then when I went back to the actual calendar who has everything, I was like, oops, no, I cannot do that. And now I just have the ability on the Android phone, if that's what I have with me, to look every calendar that I have. So I can get the same full view that I will get on any of my iOS devices. So, and the reason I bring in the example of the calendar is because that's what the reaction of most people is, oh, well, I have an Android, or I start with an Android, or I start with an iOS, or a Mac, or a PC. Okay, and now I'm stuck in here. Well, if you figured out what are the parts that that doesn't allow you to move, you may be able to replace one app or two. There are apps that I understand you're not going to be able to replace, but there is many ways to make things work one way or the other. As I said at the beginning of this, I'm on a project where we're using Google Docs, and it's a co-writing project, and it's important that I check what's happening on the document before I go into that, okay? And then, well, what that has created is I needed to find a way to do it from the iPad because I don't want to carry more technology on the back. So I decide to install Google Remote Desktop. That is a free solution. And then I can log in into my computer at home and then open the Google Docs, check Google Docs on a Mac that then allows me to see the changes. And as soon as I saw the changes and study where they are, then I can go back to iCloud on my iPad and then add whatever I want to add or edit whatever I want to edit. It's not perfect. No, it's not perfect. But it beats the carrying, another device, without any doubt, at least for me.
My experience has been that the apps I use, there's no parity across the different ecosystems and devices. So the choice of a particular, let's say, particular app, if I prefer to use a particular app on a particular device or in a system, I would give that up in favor of a different device if it's going to simplify my overall system. So I think that simplicity and trying to cut down the number of things I have to carry and not having to worry about moving documents between different kinds of apps and compatibility, I would give up the app first, and then in favor of trying to keep things simple and keep the number of devices and the number of apps as few as possible. So, for example, I used to keep my calendar on Outlook Calendar, and then it became complicated or impossible at some point to walk with my calendar. This is before Outlook 365. I couldn't carry my calendar with me, which turned out to be a huge problem. So I said, you know what, the writing is on the wall. So I stopped using it and I switched over to Google Calendar exclusively. And for me, once again, it's the choice of the app is less important than the functionality and the simplicity. I guess I'm not a fan of anything except my own workflow.
That makes a lot of sense. I just think about my history with apps and hearing about new applications when they would be only on iOS and they wouldn't go to Android until they were, fairly big enough, that they had grown enough and had a supporting developer staff to be able to do that on Android. And that was back when it was much more difficult to code on both platforms as easily as it is today, I believe. And I think that today you now see a switch, since there are so many more Android users on the planet than there are iOS users. And that's not, again, it's not an issue of one being better than the other. But the reality factor of that, I think a lot of development now has skewed back toward Android in terms of if you want to see a lot of startups doing new cool stuff, those that are probably here in the United States tend to focus on iOS development first. Because we have, a large concentration of iOS, of iPhone owners. But the rest of the globe, tends to focus on Android application development, because if you look at China, if you look at India, if you look at very large population countries, most of those people, the continent of Africa, each of those nations within Africa, all of those nation states and large countries, their primary user is Android. It's 80%, maybe more than that now, of the phones on the planet. So with that in mind, it's only natural that they would, go to that platform first, at least as a building an MVP, seeing the minimum viable product. But I think, again, for me, when I pay attention to a lot of startup technology, and because of the work that I do, and watching these tech startups launch, I find it to be, somewhat distasteful when it's only on one platform. And I completely understand resources are limited and they want to build their MVP, but it's a little bit distasteful to some community when they aren't able to actually access that application. And there are even some really solid productivity tools out there today that still don't have parity on the other platform. I'm going to pick on OmniFocus because I'm sure the Omni group is not going to be hurt by my statement here, but OmniFocus is still Apple only. They focus only on Apple users, and I believe that they say their opinion there would be that they're focusing on the iOS and macOS platforms because it allows them to be able to create a very tight-knit product that looks at the core of their user base. And I believe that they're missing the boat. I believe that they're not reading their audience correctly. There are lots of people who are, I wouldn't say stuck, but they are obligated to use an operating system outside of Apple's, operating systems, and they would love to use OmniFocus 2 or OmniGrapple or OmniOutliner or one of those other products if they were able to do so. So I think that for those listening who are developers, right, really think long and hard about the choice as to only developing on one platform. I completely understand if you have to launch on one platform, but certainly have a plan for being able to launch on the others, because those other platforms that seem to have a very small number of users. I'm not talking about micro populations like Symbian or BlackBerry, but really the three major operating systems should be covered in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's and this is my number one tip, is see if that tool has a web app, because if you don't want to have an application installed on your tablet, the best thing you can do is to then be able to use the browser, the mobile browser-based web app, and then just create a short icon, basically a home icon, which is a link to that application. And with many applications, Trello, a lot of applications, you can just create that home icon, and when you go to the web app, you don't really even notice that you're in the web app and not on the mobile application. My great example is Facebook. Not because I'm against Facebook at all. I teach social media all the time. My big issue is that it's a huge application. It's over 100 megabytes in size, and there's only a few applications I'm willing to install on my my operating system, my mobile operating systems that are going to be that large. Evernote is one of those, and Google and a couple of others. But Facebook is just too large, and so I use the mobile application, the web application on the mobile tablet and on my mobile phone, and it's great. It's a little basically a desktop shortcut, and it goes directly to the browser and opens it up, and it interacts and engages with what I need it to do for Facebook, almost exactly like the mobile application. So I save myself having to have all of that storage and data sitting on my phone. So I like that. All right, let's move on to form factor. I think one of the most overlooked things about a mobile tablet is that there are so many different form factors, right? You have the Chromebook Flip, which is a hybrid, right? You have the tablet that flips over and becomes a laptop device. The same thing with I would imagine the Surface fits into that hybrid category, although that keyboard really fully detaches, whereas the Chromebook Flip, it doesn't. You have the Lenovo Yoga and Yoga Books, which are kind of another hybrid because they have handwriting component to them, where you can draw and really use the Wacom technology built into it to fully be creative with a stylus on not just the screen, but on this Wacom board that's attached to it that acts as a keyboard with haptic response and all these other things. But then, you flip the keyboard behind it and it becomes a normal tablet with either Android or Windows RT on it. So what do you guys think about form factor? How much and how important is form factor for you?
I think the companies, the design companies, the Apples, the Amazons, and the Lenovo's, and so forth. The impression I keep getting is that they don't start with the actual use case. They may start with the software use case or the sort of the user use case, but not the user in the bigger sense. Like, for example, where is the tablet going to be used? In what circumstances? What physical form should it take? I find those questions to be sort of add-on and after the fact, as opposed to thought about ahead of time and sort of woven into the design from the very beginning. It's just my physical sense. It's more of a visceral feeling that when I'm interacting with my tablet or when I borrow someone's iPad, I feel myself fumbling around with the package it's in, which is usually some kind of case, the stand that comes with it, the way that the buttons are placed. The whole thing just seems to be an afterthought. And then the case that is developed is sort of fulfills the function of a stand, and it fulfills other functions, it protects it, but it all seems to be after the fact, as opposed to saying, why don't we design the product so that, say for my case, so that this person who's going to consume the content, sitting in an easy chair, has the easiest and best possible total experience of the entire physical sort of way it's put together, as opposed to just the device itself. I find it's all an after the fact thought.
I feel like there should be human trials for these technologies, especially when it comes to form factor. Very similar to the way that I see software developers sometimes not have their users' best interest in mind when they're developing a piece of software, right? They're trying to get a job done. And so they try to make the software just do the job, instead of thinking, how would someone without experience with this software be able to have the UX guide them to getting that work done, as opposed to the opposite way around. And I think that's the same way, like form factor. It's not, most technology, I believe, especially in the mobile tablet world, is not actually ergonomic. You have tiny keyboards that have been compressed to force features, right? So you can say it has a full keyboard and it has all of these other things, and it has haptic feedback and it has all these other things. And it's like, well, that's really great. However, haptic keyboard is not really great if the keyboard, I can't really type on it if my fingers are so squeezed together to be able to touch them, or that when I'm holding my tablet, for example, it's imbalanced, right? I come with a martial arts background, and so when I think about swords and fighting, we talk about balance, right? And you should be able to place a sword on its hilt in your hand and feel the balance of the handle and the blade in unison. They should be fully balanced, so that you have this experience with the sword that is an extension of you. And so I tend to think about that sense of balance of anything in my hand. And I put a tablet in my hand, and frequently, the first thing that comes to mind is its weight is important. And of course, most of that is battery, and its ability to have a larger battery means it's going to be heavier. I get that. But most often than not, the weighting of tablets is very awkward, with the weight being attempting to be evenly distributed across the surface of the tablet. And that's really actually quite foolish, right? You would want the tablet to be something that you can hold easily in your hand, as well as sit in a stand easily as well. And I infrequently see a tablet that does that. The feeling of some of the tablets as well, sometimes they're sharp edges, like a clear 90-degree corner, and it's like, have you seen a human hand before? They are not designed that way. So holding it for a long period of time ends up being something that's quite painful. I feel that way about the Microsoft Surface. The Surface is not designed for being held. And if they had just smoothed out the corners and put some kind of rubberized coating on the device, it would be a much nicer form factor and a little bit more friendly to the hand and to being held. And that would make someone experience the Surface experience. It would be greatly enhanced by doing so. So I think form factor is really important. And I consider form factor to be also screen size and screen resolution, because that experience in terms of how much real estate you have in front of you is actually a very, very important factor in terms of making sure that you're keeping your eyes healthy and you're not squinting, and that you're able to increase and decrease things like brightness and other things. But really, this real estate equates to the size of the text that you can have on the screen. I make my text a little bit bigger than I think the average person, and that's not because I'm having trouble with seeing. It's because I don't want to have trouble as I age. And so I always recommend to people that you increase the size by about 10 to 20% larger than you think is comfortable. That way you're not straining your eyes when you're looking at text on a mobile screen, because we tend to keep our text smaller. We're working our eyes, especially if you use it a lot. If you're as I am, I'm looking at technology screens every day, all day. By increasing that size, you're actually decreasing the work your eyes have to do to try to resolve. And I don't mean if you're already using 20-point font all day, then you're not having a problem. But if you're using 10-point font, you should have probably the screen resolve it about 20% larger. That's going to help reduce the strain on your eyes.
You're right, and there is nothing that will come and solve it. Based on what you said, the problem is when the tablet came and the first tablet started showing up, and people start considering, I may be able to do my job in this tablet. So what was the first thing people did? Let's attach a keyboard to the bottom of the tablet. In other words, let's make it as close as possible as what we understand a computer is, aka a laptop. Okay? If you look images of tablets and people using tablets, most people want to use the tablet as a laptop, and that doesn't work, because the reason the laptop works is the weight is on the bottom and the screen doesn't weigh anything. That's what makes the balance. So in order to make a tablet work that way, since the most of the weight is on the tablet side, then manufacturers need to make the keyboards super heavy so that way the balance, otherwise the tablet will always fall down. That's problem one. Problem two is as the evolution of the tablet begin to came, people and the devices begin getting powerful. I'm talking about 7-10 years ago. What happened was what you described early on when you said, Android start giving a big part of the world the chance to have their first computer. I'm sorry, the first computer for most of the world has not been a Windows machine, obviously not a Mac or an iOS. The first machine for most people was an Android device, an Android phone. That's where the biggest number of the population begin getting their first experience to have a full computer. And that experience at a full computer was really on the form of a mobile phone, not on the form of a tablet. A lot of users, from the user perspective, they live or they have access to a full-blown computer via work, or their main machine or the main device, it comes to be a mobile phone. In many cases, an Android mobile phone. When you come to the ergonomics and you come on how to use it and you think on tablets, a lot of people think, the tablet may give me a better, more portable laptop experience. But we still, the first iPad came out in 2010. 7 years later, we are still trying to make it as a laptop, And doesn't matter which one you pick. Go and pick Samsung, you can pick even the Chromebooks, the dual things. Everybody has tried to make, let me see how we make this a laptop like, or look like a laptop, because what we understand as productive is a laptop form. I'm not saying it's not is going to change or not change? I don't know. Okay, the reality is, yeah, I have a keyboard in front of mine. But what people haven't understand yet, for a tablet to be productive or to produce a productive experience, the laptop is optional. When you had your old PC, your PC keyboard and mouse was a requirement. When you moved to the laptop, keyboard and mouse still was a requirement. With the touch interface, and not for everything, but for a lot of things, the keyboard and obviously the mouse are optional and in many cases not required. But until people internalize that those two elements are optional and you may not need it, the evolution that we need, it's going to continue fading. When I help people moving to iPad only and coach them to go iPad only and look at their workflow and all that, the first frustration people had is the lack of mouse. It's not the power on the machine, it's not the battery, it's not the weight, it's not the software, it's the fact that their iPad will not have a mouse. How am I going to do to click? Oh, you have 13 inches of touch screen. What else do you want? But for most people, but I want to have that little mouse and to move a cursor around the screen. Until we break those, it's not going to happen. And the reality is, with mobile phones getting more and more and more powerful, I don't think it's going to happen. Palm Pilot, before it went bankruptcy, the founder of Palm Pilot, he came with a concept that was called the Palm Folio. Okay, and people at that time laughed at Palm for that. And basically what it was a keyboard and a screen that will have connect to your mobile phone, use the power of your mobile phone, and just give you a 10-inch screen with a full-size keyboard. Okay? And when I thought that concept, I said, that's the future. The problem was it came ahead of time. It was way too early on the race for people to see it. But I guarantee you that if HP, who owns the patent for that, come up with a device where you can now get your mobile phone and just carry a dumb terminal that will connect Bluetooth with your phone, gives you now a 10-inch screen and a keyboard to work, and then when you close it, everything gets back to your mobile device, they will sell more devices than the number of tablets we have been seeing sold in the market. Because I think for most people, their main device is not a laptop, not even the tablet, it's their mobile phone.
I think you were talking about Jeff Hawkins, right? The founder of Palm Pilot or Palm Inc.
That's what I'm talking about, yes.
Yeah. It's actually really remarkable. I want to cover a couple of other things. One is that when you think about input-output, as technology engineers are wont to do, we have these ways of inputting into a device, whether that be touching the device, whether that be a physical keyboard or a touchscreen display. We can speak into the microphone by using audible and voice-activated operations, including software for recognizing what we're saying so that we can have it interpreted to text or commands. We can gesture to cameras, right? So the cameras in our laptops and computers and other devices can interpret our movements as something. And of course, there's accelerometers inside of our devices. There's a lot of ways in which we can control a device, but it's still very limited. And I think that's really something that we have to overcome over time as technologists, society. Technologists within that need to figure that out. Whether that be, I know this sounds very sci-fi, but whether the devices actually are connected in some way, shape, or form to our brain functions, so that you would have something that's interpreting your brain output so that it can actually be communicated directly to the computing device that you have. I think that's the optimal way. I think that using my voice or typing on a keyboard is very inefficient. My brain processes at magnitudes greater than and faster than I could ever physically type or that I could ever physically speak. And I think there's going to have to be a huge leap from where we are today, inputting into devices, to where we go, and that's just really just a reality factor there. I would like to talk about budget just a little bit, which is that choosing a tablet, one of the primary functions that's going to increase or decrease the screen resolution, your processor speed, battery life, memory, whether that be ROM or RAM, onboard temporary memory, as well as the memory that's holding your operating system and long-term storage of things, and whether or not you have cellular access or only Wi-Fi access to the internet through that device, right? So if you need cellular access, so making sure that your tablet has that connectivity is also important. And those are all going to be price factors, right? So, you really need to think about that. As Francis was talking about earlier, the Amazon Fire ends up being probably on the least expensive versions of that. I think at the time of this recording, you can get an Amazon Fire tablet, the 7-inch, I think, for like $50. The next level up, and that's great. And the next tier up, the 8-inch version of that, the 7-inch version is the $49 one, I think, and then the 8-inch version is $80, I think, is something like that. And while we're talking about the Amazon Fire, something that I have been frequently recommending to people is that if you have a kid, if you have children, and you are looking to get just a tablet that can be beat up and tossed around and really not worry about it, is actually the Amazon Fire Kids Edition. And so the Kids Edition is this great little device. It is designed with a sheath, like a foam sheath, so that you can toss around and such, and it can be beat up, kind of, but that's besides the point, because it's just basically an Amazon Fire tablet that has been converted. The operating system is actually the same, you just turn it on or off, but basically it comes with the kids version enabled. But what's cool about it is it comes with a free 1-year Amazon free time subscription, so you basically have access to all of the kids content on Amazon Prime, and a warranty, so that if the kid breaks it in that time frame, they will replace the tablet through whatever warranty program that they have. So for whatever it costs, I think it's like $130, you get this child-proof tablet that you can have replaced several times in the course of a year, and then you can replace it with a lot of content built right into it, because of access through Amazon Free Time. So just something to consider. And so I think that's really quite important for you to think about. But you can then get up into the $1,000 to probably $1,500 range with a tablet very easily and quickly. And then you can even go further beyond that with some really high-end, tablets that cover a whole wide variety of manufacturers. I think all the major tech companies have a tablet probably in the near $2,000 range once you start to put all the bells and whistles. Plus, think about how you're going to budget in getting the keyboard attachment, or if you're going to get a case or a screen protector or a stylus, and how those accessories actually bundle into the price of the overall cost of acquisition for your tablet. Okay, so it's always important to consider.
They took your advice about doing, I think you said, focus groups or giving the user testing with the kids, but they didn't do it with the adults.
Yeah, so I think they did human trials with children.
Right, exactly. And they I think it's the problem I see with apps and software and devices and everything productivity related, certainly, is that the those who are doing the developing are so close to the product that they can't see. They don't get the worldview or the habits, the behaviors of the first-time user. So they lose a grasp of what their real customer is going to be using the program or the device for. And that produces these gaps that we've talked about today. I remember hearing about this one piece of software that I don't think it was Microsoft, but it was a company that produces software. And the developers had the wherewithal, let's call this brilliance, to make sure that the programmers used slow computers. So rather than give them the latest equipment, which they of course would love and they would prefer to design on and they would do their testing on, and it would give them this warped reality, but not the average reality that their customers would experience, because their customers would typically have slower computers. So that that's one way to fill the gap, but I think there are other ways. For example, the focus groups that you mentioned, because we as customers we bring behaviors to every product that we're about to use. We bring a worldview, and if that's not taken into account, then we could easily reject the product or the service or the device for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I think one great example of this is how Facebook, after a while, Mark Zuckerberg required all of his developers to use Android phones because they had heard enough that the Facebook experience on Android was abysmal, and so he just basically said, okay, well, nobody gets an iPhone, you all have to use Android on the I'm guessing on the mobile team that was developing it, and that pushed them to bring Facebook's mobile app to parity with the iOS version, and I think that's appropriate. I think it's important for there to be a good user experience across different platforms, and I think there's a responsibility. I mean, I really do believe that there is a strong responsibility for technologists to steward the development of society through the creation of good software. I see this all the time with all kinds of application development where they aren't taking into consideration that there are human hearts and minds on the other side of the code. And when you put that into the world, that's affecting people in very real ways. I think the Google Maps team, they understand that when you put that software on a mobile device, you're truly affecting people in the real world. But I think other developers don't get that sense of responsibility that, like not a car crashing because you're following Google Maps off a cliff, and there are examples of that, right? But that's why that team has such a rigorous testing, QA policy, but I think all software it should be required for that, because if your productivity software, and I mean from your basic task manager right on up to something like Google Maps, everything in between, it is truly making some kind of effect on your ability to get things done. And when that happens or doesn't happen, it really is, it's not just frustrating for the user, but it's potentially threatening to all of us, because it creates ripples of unproductive input or output or really great productive output when done correctly. Well, this has been another fantastic show for ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. Thank you so much for joining us here on ProductivityCast. If you have chosen a mobile tablet thanks to what we've been talking about, or before we started talking about it, tell us how and what you chose. Really, tell us in the comments. Head over to productivitycast.net to episode 9 and comment in the comments. Let us know what tablet you chose and why you chose it, and that'll be really great for us to hear the feedback in terms of mobile tablet choice. With that, here's to your productive life.
That's it for this episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.